Thanks, everyone, for tuning into another episode of CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. I'm Matt Schlapp, along with Mercedes Schlapp.
Well, we'll be talking with Kevin Hassett, the former chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors under President Trump. But first, breaking news on the corona front.
So we have two amazingly insightful guests, really brilliant people. The first guest is one of our ACU board members, Gordon Chang. And Gordon has been talking about the origins of Chinese corona and the Wuhan labs. We've seen Dr. Fauci get out there, and like the coin flip he is, sometimes it's one thing, sometimes it's the opposite things. We've watched Rand Paul school him in hearing after hearing, but more important than even that, we're bringing you Gordon Chang right now to get to the bottom of what we know about the communist government's role in potentially the leaking of the virus, the creation of the virus, and all the misinformation that's been coming out of all these government officials' mouths since the beginning of this. Gordon Chang, thanks for joining us on this important topic.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Matt and Mercy.
So, Gordon, let's start with the tweet that you sent out just today. We know that President Biden has now asked for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19. You put out a statement saying, is Biden trying to delay matters with this 90-day investigation? So I think that's a very valid question. Why do you think that Joe Biden and the administration is looking to delay this investigation?
Yeah, the one thing is that we don't need the assessments of the intelligence community in the United States. What we need are facts. We're Americans. We can figure this out on our own. And I'm worried that there's going to be political pressure put on people in the CIA and the DIA and all the rest of them to come up with what the Biden administration wants. We got to remember that President Biden just really can't be bothered about this. Remember in February, guys, he had a 2-hour phone call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and Biden didn't think to raise the whole issue of COVID-19. And today, there are 592,000 Americans that have succumbed to this disease. So I don't think Biden really believes that this should be something that the U.S. should be doing. Now, he's being forced. Yesterday was a great day for the U.S. because, in the morning we learned that the State Department had canceled an investigation into COVID-19's origins that was started by Mike Pompeo. He started that investigation. Tony Blinken, now Secretary of State, canceled it. Well, there was an uproar. And because of that uproar, then Biden had to issue that statement later on saying, well, look, I've asked the intelligence community to give me a report in 90 days. Well, we need to know what's going on because yesterday, 1,000 Americans died from this disease. That's 90,000 Americans, maybe more. We just can't wait. So I would like to see the underlying intelligence. And if they have to sort of fuzz it up a little bit to protect their sources, that's okay. But let's see the information.
Gordon, I just want to underscore one point before I ask the next question, which is you just said we don't need the intelligence community agencies, the alphabet soup, to tell us what happened. We're smart enough to read the information ourselves. Remember, these are the same intelligence agencies that said there was Russian collusion, that said that Donald Trump had done so many different nefarious things. It's gotten to the point where they're too politicized and we can't trust what they say in all matters. So what you're saying in another tweet is let's simply declassify all this information. That's the key, right? Which is get it in the hands of the American people.
Yes, and Secretary Pompeo on January 15th started that process by releasing the State Department report that had certain details. So they started this, and I think that they should just continue it in the Biden administration. Because remember, let's remember what happened this weekend. The reason why we're talking about this now is because the Wall Street Journal issued that report that 3 researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in November 2019 fell ill. And because of that, then people started to really talk about this. And then, Fauci, which you just talked about, he then started to say, well, maybe there was gain of function research. Maybe I did fund China's biological weapons program, in effect, is what he said. So once you get the facts out, it creates a dynamic. Once that dynamic gets started, we can really start to defend ourselves, regardless of what the occupant at 1600 Pennsylvania Northwest wants to do or doesn't want to do.
But Gordon, you brought up a great fact, which is getting the facts out. But in the process, we have seen the media, liberal media, fail us, the American people, time and time again. Facebook, for example, in the big tech world, they banned anything that could possibly bring up this idea that COVID-19 was being created in a lab. You saw the Washington Post, the New York Times, all of them criticizing Senator Tom Cotton, saying that these are conspiracy theorists, that it should be debunked. How outrageous should the American people be?
Yeah, and let's look at some of the facts. If you don't like the lab leak theory, well, there's only one other one. That's what's called a zoonotic transfer, that this somehow started from a bat, went to an intermediary mammal in the wild, and then infected humans. Well, after more than a year of intensive search, nobody has found the reservoir of this disease. Nobody has been able to document the transmission links. This is a theory that virologists and scientists love, but they can't find any evidence for it. So if you want to talk about conspiracy theories, it's the one that this was a naturally occurring bug. There's a lot more circumstantial evidence about a lab leak. Now, we don't have 100% that this is a lab leak, but it really is starting to look like this is not a natural pathogen. Virologists have been looking at some really unusual features of the virus. This is really starting to look like a case where China actually made a bug.
Yeah, and this is the thing. We keep using the word leak. Leak almost implies that that it could have been a mistake as well. It could have been an accident. This could have been an intentional, warfare, germ warfare on the whole civilized world. And what's weird about all of this is the Biden administration almost rewards it by refunding WHO, by having these interactions with the Chinese government, almost as if nothing has happened at all.
Yes, Matt, this is a really important point you raised because, we can argue about the origins of the disease and all the rest of it, but there's certain things that we know 100%. We know 100% that the Chinese leadership, Xi Jinping and the rest, that for at least 5 weeks, maybe even longer, they lied about this disease. They knew that it was highly contagious, but they tried to convince the world that it was not. They only admitted that this was contagious publicly on January 20 of last year. But we know that before that, they were telling the WHO, and the WHO was telling the world that this was nothing to worry about, not contagious. There's a January 9 statement. There's a January 14th tweet from Tedros. And by the way, the senior doctors at the WHO knew this was highly contagious, but the political leadership at that organization told the world it was not. Also, we know Xi Jinping was pressuring countries not to impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China while he was locking down Wuhan and surrounding cities. I know lockdowns are controversial, but by locking down his own country, he was saying in his own mind, lockdowns work, which means that he was thinking that he was spreading the disease when he was forcing other countries to take passengers from China. That shows intentionality. And especially along with lying about the disease, that is an instance where they maliciously spread this disease beyond China's borders. If this was not a biological weapon to start out with, he turned it into one.
Gordon, as a board member of the ACU, you know that we have this important CPAC conference in Dallas where we're going to talk about these very sobering issues of essentially the Biden's appeasement in their foreign policy. Will we know by July 9th more about the origins of Chinese corona?
I think we will, Matt, and there's a couple reasons. First of all, there are people in the intelligence community who have a conscience and who are willing to leak some of this stuff. That's how I think the Journal got their story. I'm not sure, I don't work there, but that's my guess. Also, the Chinese people are starting to talk about this. So for instance, there's a virologist in Hong Kong who fled to the US, Li Mingyan, who talks about it. People may agree with her, may not be, but people in China are now starting to come out and tell us the truth.
Brave people. And Gordon Chang, keep coming forward with your analysis on this really important story, one of the most important stories out there. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us in Dallas. And we're going to be right back with the great Kevin Hassett.
Welcome back to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. And joining us now is one of my dear friends, Matt, who I got to work
Mine
with.
too.
Let's not fight over him.
Yeah.
Who I got to work with at the White House. He was actually my
Because I have
couch
nice
buddy.
puppets in my office, right? I mean,
He was my couch buddy in the Roosevelt room during our daily staff meetings. Kevin Hassett, former chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors under President Trump. Kevin, thank you for joining us.
Okay, now just full stop.
Yes.
What the hell is a couch buddy? I'm very
well, we
confused.
always sat in the
Oh, come
back. There's
on.
a little couch in the Roosevelt room.
There was a couch. It was usually like Larry Kudlow with his pillow in the back.
All right, I
and
feel
then
better. I
Kevin
feel
and
better. That's good.
but honestly, for the first 6 months or maybe less, Mercy, it was me, you, and Omarosa. Remember?
Ooh,
We always sat on that
That's-
couch. Right?
we don't even mention that name anymore. Wow, that's a blast from the past,
she
Kevin.
who should not be named.
Oh, I don't know. I got along with her fine. So.
Oh, we had great times at the White House. It was challenging, but I got to tell you something. The one thing I learned about Kevin is he was always a straight shooter with the president, would present the data, present the facts. So let's go into the facts. What is going on in the Wuhan lab? What is going on with the Biden administration when they shut down one investigation, but now have decided to open up another?
Yeah, so there are a couple things there, but for the Wuhan lab, basically it's something that I've been following, since really before I went back to the White House to help manage the economic response to COVID, and the evidence is pretty overwhelming that it's a leak for the lab, and we kind of knew that from the beginning, I think, because just Occam's razor. They've got like a level 4 lab in Wuhan, and now suddenly there's this weird virus that appears right there. But also there was some intel that's now public that all the way in the fall, before this sort of supposed outbreak at the wet market, from the wet market, that some people at this Wuhan lab were hospitalized with COVID-like symptoms. And so I actually think that looking at the history of last year, that one of the real turning points where the American media lost its mind completely was when they basically started to say it's a discredited conspiracy theory that it came from the Wuhan lab. And I have a new rule of thumb, which I think all conservatives should use, which is that if the liberal media tells you something's a discredited theory, then it must be true.
No, this is true. And actually, it's funny, but it's also tragic because what's happening is that people actually need to know information so they can make decisions on their health and stuff. So let's punctuate what you just said, that the Wuhan lab gets this tremendous amounts of funding. They're studying viruses like this. People in and around the Wuhan area are getting sick with a mysterious virus. So what do people under Occam's razor assume? Must be something going on in that lab. What does the national news media in America and around the globe tell us? You're a conspiracy theorist. This came from Denmark. I mean, you really almost can't make it up.
And I just want to highlight that basically what was going on, right, is that the World Health Organization put out a report saying it came from the wet market. And, Tony Fauci, I was in the Oval when he basically said the World Health Organization is above reproach. And I was actually kind of shocked after I left the White House, quite a bit later. And I found that the person who was one of the leading lights of the World Health Organization study was a guy who had lots of grants from Tony Fauci to do research on bad viruses. And so that the guy who basically said it couldn't possibly come from the lab was the guy who might be, partly culpable if it did come from the lab.
And Tony Fauci says famously the other day in front of Congress, well, we really don't have the right to question our grantees. Can you imagine?
Okay, but the thing that we do know about that is that I think that if you go back and look at how there started to be a morality tale about President Trump and Tony Fauci that emerged, where Fauci's like this honorable scientist and President Trump is like this crazy kook who's disregarding science, that really it started, I think, over this. Because you guys both know President Trump, and one of the things, even if you think about like how brilliant his nicknames are, he kind of sees things before everybody else does. And then,
Yes.
he'll say things, like even about the economic data, you saw it happen, Mercy, you were in a lot of those meetings. Like he just sees patterns and he sees things. And so he looked at all this and he's like, oh, totally, it came from the Wuhan lab. And then Fauci was, basically dismissive of that. And I think that really started, and also President Trump didn't believe the World Health Organization at all, right? In the end, we defunded them, and Tony was defending them. And so I just think that that's where the break started. I think that's where because President Trump just decided, well, this guy, isn't gonna like take the obvious conclusion or even like accept that the obvious conclusion should at least be investigated. Then how can I trust him with anything else?
And you talking about Dr. Fauci, I know that during the campaign, a lot of the women I would talk to who were on the fence about President Trump, they fully 100% trusted Dr. Fauci and they questioned Trump, which was a very interesting phenomenon. And just last year, CNN, they basically said, Anthony Fauci just crushed Donald Trump's theory on the origins of the coronavirus. So every time Dr. Fauci spoke, he was saying one thing, although he changed his mind and his narrative about 16, 17 times. You were there. You saw Dr. Fauci in action. What was it with him?
I think that we should all take a deep breath though and remember that the fog of war is a very difficult thing. And there's this new virus out there, and everybody's trying to wonder how bad is it going to get. And at the beginning, we thought 25% of the people who get the virus are going to die, and it's going to be like Ebola or something. Right. And so I think that Dr. Fauci's telling everybody don't tell people to wear masks because there's no evidence that the masks have any effect. And then as we learn more, I think sometimes we change things because we learn. I kind of respect that. But the thing that jumps out at me that in retrospect, I'm very sort of like upset about, anxious about at least, is that, the link to the gain of function research that was going on at that lab, there are published papers that are clearly using bat viruses and bragging about the fact that they've been able to get them to replicate in human lung tissue from that lab. And the fact that, I think that if you knew that research was going on, then what you should have done the minute that it looked like there's something going on in Wuhan is you should have said, hey, you know what? This is like the worst nightmare. These guys are doing stuff for research that's developing really, really nasty things. And if one of those things got out, there's going to be millions of deaths. And so we need, but instead what they're doing, right, is they're sort of saying, oh, it's not a big problem, it doesn't spread from human to human from at the beginning. But if these guys knew in December or before then that there's possibly a leak of something that was basically the result of gain of function research, that's very upsetting. And I think that all the other things are much smaller problems compared to that.
Yeah, and there's so much we want to get to talk to you about, but just to finalize this conversation, so we actually, Dr. Fauci and the government was involved in potentially funding research that would result in this type of virus. And I think that's why when now people are like, well, we were funding it, we knew it was going on, and then it occurs, and then it gets out into the population, yet all the way along, they acted like we were crazy for bringing these things up.
Yeah,
that
right.
Creates such cynicism, Kevin, in people's minds.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just to be clear, that the Obama administration thought that this type of research was, too risky. And so they halted it. But then when we came in, Mercy, basically the NIH decided to begin funding it again. And they purposely, I believe, decided to do that without, did you ever hear about that when you were in the White House, Mercy? Of course not, right? No one ever told us, but every decision went through us. Through the president eventually, but we would have heard about it, in the morning meeting or something like that, right? And so the point is that they absolutely, there's no dispute that they decided to refund this type of research. There's no dispute that they funded research at the Wuhan lab. And so I think that there's a mess that we'll get to the bottom of, and it's just sad that it's so late.
Well, and shifting gears, I know you obviously have a very strong understanding of where we're headed in terms of our economy, obviously with the impact that our nation and the world has suffered under this COVID or going through this COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, in the press conference talking about the jobless claims, it seems that they've come down a bit. Where do you think we're going to be in the next couple quarters that we have left?
Yeah, well, I think that, you know, the first quarter and the second quarter this year are going to be pretty strong, you know, and it's a recovery from the biggest decline since World War II. But, you know, I think that the first economic policy thing that I would say is that, you know, we're pretty strong because we had the biggest policy response since World War II as well. And to put it in perspective, you know, government spending to GDP this year is going to be about the same level as it was in 1943. 43. And so we have to come down from that. And you know, reducing government spending to GDP by 10%, you know, if you're a classic liberal Keynesian, then you would say that's going to reduce GDP by 20% or something, right? Because the multiplier is 2. And so we have a fundamental problem right now that we're really juiced up the economy, and we have to ramp off of that. And it's not exactly clear how you can do that without serious disruption. But in the near term, we've got a serious problem that basically, you know, we refilled the hole that was dug by shutting down the economy. So by the end of the year, we were pretty much back where we started the previous year, which is miraculous because, you know, during March, April, May, I really thought you would have seen me on TV saying, you know, this is the biggest shock since the Great Depression. I was nervous if we didn't have big policy responses, we'd have a depression. Okay. And so, but then after refilling the hole, the Biden administration decided to double down and just throw a whole bunch of more cash at the economy. And the problem is that if you have lots of demand, then you need to increase supply a lot too if you don't want prices to skyrocket, right? But the supply isn't going up a lot. You know, they're paying unemployment insurance benefits to workers, so people are being, you know, make a lot more if they stay home than if they go to work. And, you know, capital spending isn't skyrocketing like you might think it would do because President Biden has promised big tax hikes. And so why would you build a new factory right now, you know, when they're going to come after you, you know, in the fall? And so there's no supply, but there's massive demand. And so I think we're going to see the biggest inflation shock we've seen since the 70s. Yeah. And you're already seeing it in the data. And the thing about inflation, I don't mean to filibuster, is that it really hurts ordinary folks. Because most people who are listening, you know, they get their salary adjusted maybe, you know, at the beginning of the year now and then. And if prices go up 5% this year instead of 2%, then you're 3% worse off because of that. You know, almost every American is. And that's why, you know, that when Matt and I were kids, and before you were born, Mercy, I think.
That makes it really young.
But inflation was like the #1 policy thing. Right. Everybody was always talking about inflation because it hurts so many people. And I think that the Biden policies are going to be profoundly unpopular by the fall because inflation will be visible to everybody.
If I can jump in, because the Treasury Secretary doesn't agree with you. She says, and we're going to show this video.
I really doubt that we're going to see an inflationary cycle, although I will say that all the economists in the administration are watching that very closely. As my colleagues have said, the CEA put out a blog post on this. We expect somewhat higher inflation over the next several months.
You know, I would call it a discredited conspiracy theory, but then that would mean it's correct, right? So, no, I think that you know, I've known Janet for a really good long time and had lunch regularly with her when I was CEA chair and she was chair of the Fed. I actually, you know, thought that it would have been a great idea to reappoint her. I love Jay Powell too, but you know, when we had conversations, I actually kind of leaned in the direction of Janet. So I have the highest regard for her, but she and I differ because she doesn't focus enough, I believe, on the supply side. Right. She's more of a demand side economist. And if you look at the demand side, you know, you should be really happy because there's all this demand because we've given cash to everybody. But I worry a lot about where's the supply going to come from. And the thing is that the spiral happens if people's expectations become unmoored. And it happens because of the thing we just talked about. So, you know, if there's 5% inflation, then, you know, you guys are going to ask your bosses for a bigger raise next year. And then when you get that bigger raise.
Am I going to get a raise, Schlapp? That's all I need to know.
Yeah. But then when you get that raise, then costs are higher. And so you have to raise your prices again. And then you're in the spiral. And so what you have to do is look at expectations to see if the data are consistent with Secretary Yellen's hypothesis. And right now they're very inconsistent. And the thing I look at is the Michigan survey asked people what they think inflation going to be over the next 12 months. And it's gone from in the 2s, where it's always been, for the last 15, 20 years, to about 4. And I think that's probably about accurate. And so once the expectations jump, then her story's wrong.
Help us out real quick. What would you consider would be that red zone, bad inflation, that number that if it pops up, we should be very concerned?
Basically, I think that right now all contracts in the U.S. Factor in the presumption of about 2% inflation. That's like business plans, compensation packages, and so on. And so if you're at 3% instead of 2%, then that means workers are 1% worse off. Remember, if you're 2% worse off, that's a typical recession. So 1% worse off is actually a big deal if you're 1% worse off, if your income goes down by 1%. But if you have 5% inflation, then you're, say, 3% worse off. If you have 7% inflation, which I think it's completely possible that we jump to 7% by next year, then you're 5% worse off. And if you do that, 3 or 4 years in a row, then all of a sudden you've had like a massive hit to your standard of living. Right. And that's the world I think that we've entered because of these pretty reckless policies.
So we remember, you said we're old, we remember those whip inflation now, the win buttons for Gerald Ford. This is the killer for presidencies when inflation starts to rob the forgotten men and women of their purchasing power. But quickly, Kevin, you and I have both done a lot of corporate work all over the years. Corporations, by and large, used to be an ally to the idea of lower taxes and less regulation and strict constructionist judges. Do you have any hope that these crazy woke corporations and CEOs are beginning to realize that the Republican Party isn't going to be there to protect their tax cuts if these folks are just bombarding them every day by destroying the culture that we live in?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I know it's on everybody's mind, and in fact, just to give a little blurb, that we've got a special issue at National Review coming out on this topic pretty soon. I don't know if I'm not supposed to talk about future issues. So sorry, Rich Lowry, if I wasn't supposed to run out and get there.
It's okay, we'll just tweet it out. It's fine.
But woke capitalism, it's a serious issue. But I think that the thing that you got to remember is that the Democrats have started out with companies way, way behind. Because companies want to spend money on things that earn them profits, and if they're making political contributions, they're doing it because historically there are candidates that threaten their future and candidates that don't. And so if the Democrats are going to really lift the corporate tax, then that's really bad for shareholders, and it's right for the corporation to fight that thing. So if you look at it, there's a study recently out by the National Bureau of Economic Research that showed that really about 70% of CEOs are Republicans, and only about 18% are Democrats. And it completely makes sense because again, if you're running a company and you're trying to maximize profits for folks, then you're not going to be wasting your money on stupid things like social justice. Yes, social justice is an important thing, but not for profit maximization. And so the point is just that what the Democrats are trying to do is starve the beast. So that they recognize that the Republicans historically have a big advantage in support from corporate leaders because Republicans pursue policies like deregulation and lower taxes that are good for shareholders. And so they're trying to cut that off by calling companies racist and things like that. And so it's a political tactic. It's very Machiavellian. And it's, I think that if you were a CEO, you probably would be worried about, making your firm controversial. And this is actually in the NBER study, it's quite visible that, if a CEO gives money to Republicans, then that CEO is identified as Republicans because the FEC registers, oh, that guy gave money. But because of Citizens United, the company doesn't have to say what it's doing. And if you look at companies run by Democrats, then they actually are very transparent about their political contributions.
Right.
But companies run by Republicans are not. And the reason is they know that the cancel culture is coming after them if they find out that they support Republicans, right? And so they're already bullied. And so I think that this woke thing, it's more of the same, but whether it actually adjusts behavior or not, I'm not so sure. I just think that the CEOs might be talking a good game to try to keep themselves from getting canceled. But in the end, they'll probably.
They can be invited to the cocktail parties. Come on, Kevin, really.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to have cocktail parties with people who are bullies. I don't know.
I don't either. Well, I think the biggest problem we have is that, more than 50% of the Republicans in Congress are barred from getting these corporate PAC checks. And I think they're in a fighting mood with these corporations. So, Kevin, let's hope that some sanity comes back to the situation. But I do think that this coalition between corporate America and the conservative movement, it's very busted. I'm not sure it's going to come back so easily.
I'm sorry, my phone just rang. I can't believe I didn't silence it before.
What is it, like a dock or something? What is that?
Yeah, nobody uses that ring, and so I use it because then I know it's my phone. But yeah, I think that it's just part of like this culture of bullying that we're experiencing.
I agree with that.
And I think that moderate Democrats, could be as much as Republicans the hope for the country, because if I were a moderate Democrat, I'd be tired of getting bullied myself.
When you find that moderate Democrat, you let me know who he or she is. I'd be very excited that there is one. That's exciting. Kevin Hassett, we appreciate you being with us. You're so smart. You always help us understand things in the most basic of terms.
I really think his IQ is probably higher than both of ours.
Oh, cut it out. Anyways,
Anyway,
guys, and hope to see you in Dallas.
Great.
We'll be
Same
right
here.
back to CPAC Now America on Campus. And now for some good news in the midst of all this bad news, talking about what's going on with China and the virus, yada, yada, yada. You and I get the chance to hit the road, and we were up in Bedminster, New Jersey at the President's Club there, which is a beautiful club, and we got to talk to Marla, who's here in this photo, and Elizabeth, and Phil Rizzo, who's running for governor, and all these great activists around New Jersey. What's amazing about these people, what's so inspirational, is that everyone says Jersey's blue, they should give up. They're not giving up.
No.
They're fighting hard. And what's really cool about being in Bedminster is that is the library for John DeLorean. The DeLorean car from Back to the Future with the winged doors that go up to the sky.
You're really dating yourself, Matthew.
I know, I'm old. But it's
Totally
pretty
dating
cool.
yourself.
So this is what the president does with Mar-a-Lago and Bedminster. He buys these old rich people's homes, usually in foreclosure, turns them into golf courses. This is a beautiful place to be.
But the best thing about it is being able to get together with great patriots like
That's
yourselves.
exactly
and
right.
don't forget, you really play a big part in everything that we do to save America, and that includes going door to door, talking about the issues that matter, talking to your neighbors, to those at your church. It makes a difference.
Sure
Go
does.
in with facts. That's what we want to make sure you have handy. And also go to CPAC in Dallas, Texas, July 9th through the 11th. It's going to be a national conference. We're going to bring you all the best speakers.
That's right.
It's an opportunity to network and meet other people and other families like you that are doing their best to stand up for America, stand up for our values and our freedoms.
Come join us, CPAC, Dallas, Texas, July 9th through the 11th. Go to conservative.org where you watch this show. Click on the link, get the information to become a sponsor, to get tickets. Tickets are as low as $50, and they get a little bit more expensive than that too, depending on how many people and what you want to do. But we're going to have a great time. We got to save our country, folks. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for joining us on this great show.